Hey, what's up guys? It's Oakley. I've been playing a little more Rome 2, had a little more time to play, so I'm actually pretty much enjoying the game. It's been a while since I've been able to play Rome 2 and any Total War games just because I've been super busy with school, and I put up that recent video. I had my birthday recently where we went skydiving and all that stuff, so I figured I'd share that with you. Anyways, I'm back to playing Rome 2, and it's actually, it turns out I missed it. Despite all of the flaws with the game, I do really inherently love the matching of different generals online. I really like multiplayer. Some people find flaws with Rome 2's multiplayer. I do as well, but I do like the challenge of fighting general via versus general, especially in the Roman time period, getting away from the guns and all that stuff that we had in the past. Now, Shogun, I think, was probably a really good system, but Rome 2 is getting there. They recently had patch 3 that went live. They're working on patch 4, and the more and more tweaks that they put in, the more and more balanced and fair the game gets. Actually, in this battle, I decided I would try Athens. Athens is one of the underplayed factions. My opponent is, he was a very nice guy, very good player, and he chose the Iceni. So I know Iceni are definitely, of course, a barbarian, and they have very good cavalry, and they also have the Britain slingers, which are good, and they have a strong component of just melee infantry. So going into this battle, I know what I'm facing up against, but I figured, I'm going to try my hand at Athens because I want to try and promote more variety and hope to show that you guys can beat some of these stronger factions, and especially the barbarians, with some maybe underappreciated factions here. But of course, it does take a little more micro than would otherwise be necessary. So you could have seen there with Athens, my build is going to rely a bit on my skirmishers. So that's sort of historically accurate with Athens. Athens, however, would have been more known for its navy and pretty well known for her hoplites and all that stuff, and she did rely on a good amount of mercenary troops, especially during the wars in Greece. But in any case, I decided to field 4 cavalry units. 2 of them are going to be hidden back here, and I'm trying to save those because I know my opponent is going to have some strong cavalry and definitely slingers. So what we're going to do is place those in the back and try and use those as a surprise later on. My goal here is to try and kites or kite, I can't remember what it is. I think it's kite. Anyway, it's a term that people use back in the games with back in Empire and Napoleon and stuff like that, where we had guns, Fall of the Samurai, and the basic strategy is you have skirmishers or ranged units, and you stagger them, and basically you let your first ranks get the shot off, then they fall back to more supporting troops. Those guys have more ranged units, and you just keep putting on the fire, falling back, and keep putting on the hurt. So that's kind of going to be my strategy here, and I guess we'll see how effective it ends up being. Also, this map is basically built with this main ridge in the middle, which blocks line of sight, so it's kind of a cool feature. So you don't really know what's going on to the last moment. And so what you definitely want to do on this map is prepare for the unexpected. So that's why I'm moving my guys up here in a pretty massive blob with skirmishers in the front, in the back, and then I also have horses that are ready to sprint up the front. Definitely scout out what's going on there, and then I have my flank on the very right that's going to try and get a look at what his troops are doing. So right off the bat, I'm going to move these guys to the right because I know that's a little more even ground for my approach. Going to move those guys up here, and I'm going to start moving these guys up because I don't want his army to get to the top of the ridge and have my guys just totally out of position. And this is always a very scary moment where you don't quite know what's going on. Once you crest the ridge, you have to figure out what's going on. So as I crest the ridge, you'll see that I start to witness what his army is doing. And all of a sudden, I start to get pretty scared because I see his units are all charging. He has a bunch of cavalry moving up. So all of a sudden, I kind of go into panic mode. I move my forces back. And at this point, your opponent can inflict heavy damage on you. So make sure not to overreact. Pull your forces back if possible. So right here, what I did wrong was I didn't micro those cavalry long enough. He got the first strike with his heroic nobles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and support them. But everywhere else on the battlefield, I'm retreating these guys back, but at the same time, I have my archers here that are going to be fighting his forces. I will accept battle from his troops. I know he doesn't have supporting forces that are going to be there in time. Also, I can see right here that he's making a move for my skirmishers, so my opponent is definitely going to try and knock out my cavalry on this flank. But what I'm going to do is make sure that all the while I'm putting on, archer fire into his units, and I'm going to be reinforcing with spears because I know his horses are going to be a key to his victory. If I can knock those out, there goes his mobility, and all of a sudden my skirmisher advantage is going to go way up. So that's kind of what I'm angling for. You can see on the left his units here are getting peppered. But at the same time, I'm in no position to attack his forces here. He's got the hill, he's got 3 horses, and so I'm going to have to fall back. At this point, his slingers are activating their quick reload, so I've definitely got to get out of there. And I'm kind of in the precarious position here where my cavalry are going to be charged downhill by 3 of his units. So there's not much I can do, I just got to run them away. I'm kind of going into full retreat with my forces. If you feel that you're going to get too pressured by your opponent, just pull back. Go ahead and pull back on all fronts, but make sure you're not doing it in disarray. Tell all your units to run back, and then select your spear units and make sure that they're covering your skirmishers, that everything is kind of supported by something. So you can see here on this flank, I always make sure that I have spear units, and here I'm going to try and out micro his cav. So here I'm able to drive them off, and I have local superiority for my skirmishers on the left, so I'm going to be able to start picking off at his spears. That's what I want to do. The more and more I can do that, just the less support forces he has, and the more effective my cav will be if I can knock out his spears. So here he was not able to effectively run down my cav, so I'm going to bring them back into the fold of my army and set up some spear support to make sure they can make it home safely. Again, my opponent keeps circling around me, he's trying to pick me apart, but I'm keeping tabs on all my skirmishers, making sure they're not too exposed. And if he does want to try and engage, that's fine. I'll just turn around and shoot him. He's just that much closer and giving me that much more of an opportunity to actually fire at him. So something that he does that's very smart is he moves up these spears in conjunction, which is going to put more pressure on my forces. It means that I can't just sit there. He's going to have to he's going to keep pushing me back. Now I do spot an opportunity right here. I'm going to move my forces up and just try and take out his slingers, because at this point those are going to be some very important units. They're strong, especially when you have 3 of them all firing at once. They can be very powerful. Right here, I take my cav and swing them over to the right, because I know his 3 slingers against one of my troops are not gonna. That's not gonna bode well for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and reinforce with some cav, and just the threat of him seeing that coming towards him is gonna force him to fall back. So he's pulling his cavalry here, and at the same time, I still have my cavalry in the back moving forward. So it may seem like I'm in disarray, but at the same time, I am forcing his units back. I am controlling his cavalry, and I am all the while picking off some of his troops with my various units. Right here, he does get dangerously close to my skirmishers. I do have some units right here that are up and exposed, so I'm trying to move some guys up, but these guys over here are going to get picked off. They were just left to their own, so I'm sorry for those guys. They were definitely not in the best of positions, but I'm going to go ahead and try and reinforce them, and with my archers, I'm going to make sure that at least if he's going to go ahead and chase my guys, I'm going to be able to shoot them. So, that's something you got to do, is make sure that every unit has a supporting unit. It's kind of like chess, where you're thinking a couple moves ahead. Think about okay, if I move this guy here, where is he going to move? How is he going to react? And try and always stay one step ahead. I know that's maybe easier said than done, but you can see here I was able to save actually those skirmishers that seemed like they were totally exposed by moving all my forces to come and basically attack him. But what you can see here on the right is his horses were able to, I was going to say gun down, but chase down some of my units. At the same time, my 2 archers right there are putting on the hurt to his units, and I do have some cavalry coming around the back, and I'm hoping my opponent does not necessarily see where they're at, so they're going to be moving up here and trying to put on some more damage. I'm still in a pretty chaotic mode right now. I'm trying to chase off his slingers in the foreground, but I know my opponent is pretty attentive and he's going to react to this. So I'm trying to make sure my archers are still going to shoot at him, and I'm going to try and force them back so that they can't return fire on me, and I keep putting on the pressure. I'm moving my cavalry, who made the huge loop all the way. I'm going to move them, bring them back essentially to my forces here. Now, one of the problems that I spot immediately is that I'm basically pulling his horses right to my skirmishers, right to my archers, so I definitely need to move these guys out, and I'm going to move my spears forward. At the same time, these guys are getting really close here, but it's fine. He doesn't have too many skirmishers there. They are spear units, so if he decides to charge with horses, they'll hold their own. And at the same time, my archers are still shooting. So that's the, I can't overstate this enough, but those are the mechanics you got to keep in mind all the time. When his horses chase my guys all the way here, I can shoot at him with my archers. He's welcome to go ahead and charge me, but that'll end in more casualties, and it just lets me put on shots to his horses that are too close. You can see here my spears are always covering my horses. I try not to leave them too exposed, and anytime his horses turn around and decide not to charge, that's when I'm going to tell my skirmishers or my archers or whatever to attack him. I'm happy because I do have his cavalry units back here surrounded. They're taking a long time to kill off, but I know that I'm being pretty cost effective right there in running them down. I'm going to start moving my units back, but definitely, I think I'm doing a good job right now because I do have his cav isolated. I know if I can take those guys out of the fight, then all he has left are his elite units up there and some slingers. Now that's nothing to joke about because that's definitely enough forces to take me up, but I know if I keep the bulk of my skirmishers alive, I can basically force him to chase my units around it, and I can out-micro him, or at least outrange him and pick him apart. So that's going to be my plan right here. I can see my opponent is thinking of maybe even throwing away his cavalry, so I'm going to pull my units back. Because he's backing them with spear units, I know he's going to try and commit to this fight, so I'm going to try and pull back all of my units. And I am not yet ready to engage his forces. If I could, what I would ideally want to do is engage his cavalry as I did before, take them out, and then deal with his infantry. But when he moves everything up in conjunction, I'm just not powerful enough to deal with that. So you can see right here, I'm able to intercept his cavalry, and they are able to basically land some kills, but for the most part, he runs right into my pikes. And I'm a little worried about those guys on the left. At the same time, his horses are moving here. I think he had a micro lapse going through my unit. He runs into some more pikes. And over here you can see he's just sending more and more of his units to reinforce. What I would do if I were him is send the rest of his forces. At this point, I'm kind of in a dance with his units here. I'm trying to balance them all out. I'm trying to make sure my ranged units are attacking the right units, those that are turned around and those that are in need of weakening. So as I said, my opponent does the right thing here. He moves up the rest of his forces and decides that I'm sufficiently strung out that now he's going to strike with the bulk of his units. So what you got to do at this point is decide on a tactical retreat. I've been able to isolate his slingers right there, so I'm very happy about that, and I still have my horses alive, whereas he's lost most of his units. You can see right here he's charging forward with the spears. What I'm going to do is go into basically a phalanx mode and hold them down and then try and flank around with 2 of my units around the side. What I'm trying to do is isolate all of his forces that are out in the open. But at the same time, again, I can't say this enough, make sure that my ranged units are being supported, are putting the shots on him. He's making an aggressive push on the right, so I'm going to pull back. I just want to make sure that I can knock out as many of his isolated units as possible. So that means the cavalry on the left and his spear units in the center. The rest of his army, I'm not quite yet ready to engage them, so I'm going to move them back. And you can see he's doing a pretty good job microing these cavalry units here. He's going straight for my guys. They run into my spears, but as we've seen with some of the game mechanics, that doesn't mean that I'm guaranteed to win. And so what he's doing here is he's trying to circle all the way around. And sadly, he does find one of my units here. I wasn't watching them. But again, because I have so many skirmishers in the vicinity, I'm still able to shoot at his units as they turn around and run past me. He's attacking piecemeal in the center with his units. That's kind of smart. He doesn't want to tire them out. He knows they're pretty strong units and he can kind of send them in one at a time. And as long as they don't get surrounded, he should be able to be pretty cost effective. At the same time, his cavalry is running around picking off my troops here and there. So he's doing a good job. He's holding the bulk of his heavy forces in reserve and doing all that he can to knock out my forces and my skirmishing potential with his cavalry. That's exactly what you want to do. The second he can knock out all my skirmishers, then he's ready to engage fully with my forces. He decides that this charge here on these weakened units, these engaged units, is going to be a good idea. So what I decide to do is retreat one of my units and just attack with one, so I'm able to hold back his forces. At the same time, you can see the rest of my units are starting a flank attack, so I'm hoping that I can turn this into another case of this isolated units. And my archers over there in the back are going to be shooting, some more into the backs of his units. So anytime you can, make sure you surround your opponent. Make sure you have spears dispersed around your forces. You can see because I have spears all the way around and interspersed with various units, there's no real place for his cavalry to engage. And I basically have tactical mobility and enough flexibility to deal with his units. You can see because I have so many units left, he has just these 5 infantry units. He can chase all my guys around. Because I have more, I can always find a way to outflank and outmaneuver him. And he knows that. So he's going to try and be aggressive with his cavalry, and he's going to try and basically knock out groups of units at a time. Yeah, I'm just doing the best I can. I'm trying to see how best I can try and communicate, what the strategy is right now. So if you were in this position, what I would say is keep shuffling your units around. Think of it as a game. You're just playing keep away. You're trying to avoid his melee units as much as possible. while you're doing that dance, make sure your archers are always shooting at the most vulnerable targets. Make sure your spears are always facing his cavalry, and the name of the game is just run away from his units. Anytime one of his units does get isolated, make sure you attack it from multiple directions and knock it out. Otherwise, just keep dancing around from this guy, because that's something you'll see a lot of. It's not spammers, but people who have a lot of these elite units. They'll be tough, but there won't be that many of them, so you can play this game. So anytime you're in this situation, just keep cycling through all your units. Make sure you know, are you shooting if you can shoot. Make sure you're putting on as much pressure as possible. Make sure your spears are in position. Keep an eye on your opponent. Make sure you have everything locked down. And something you obviously have to check, but I didn't do at this moment, is check your minimap. You never know when one of your routing troops will come back. So at this point, you can see on the minimap that one of my cavalry units came back, and that's something that I could definitely use right now to try and even the fight. So I'm gonna check in a little bit, but that's something you gotta constantly remind yourself to do, is check the minimap, check for more units. So my opponent has done essentially what I would have done. He's isolated one of my units back there, and he's starting to knock them out. His main blob in the center is basically just going full force at my units, trying to break up their coherence, and if he can get me to spread out enough, then that's when he's going to try and strike with his cavalry. So that's a smart strategy. I'm not having too much of it. I'm spreading out my units, and as you can see, my skirmishers are basically going to use up all their ammo in an attempt to knock him out. You can even see in the back my spears held their own. My opponent figured that he had the upper hand, but I think I had inflicted enough casualties with my skirmishers and stuff like that that I did pretty well. Make sure not to get cornered against the edges of the map. That's something that he's trying to do here. So what I'm going to do is kind of thread the gap between his units and his horses and his swordsmen. So my opponent thought he'd be able to wedge me, but I'm just running right through the middle. Now, right now, what's happened is I do have a unbalance in my forces. You can see most of my forces are here, and he's been able to kind of pull off 4 of them, so that's exactly what you want to do. My opponent's doing a very good job, but I do have spears. That's the importance of keeping spears with these types of units. I can make sure they're not going to get decimated, and at the same time, you can keep chasing them, but it's just going to tire out his units. Skirmishers are going to be quicker than these heavy infantry, and at the same time, I'm just making sure I'm chasing his units, and I still have some skirmishers on this flank, so I can keep fighting them. Now, this is going to be the moment of truth for the battle, is where he's going to chase after my skirmishers. I have to keep these guys alive. It's the only way I can whittle down his forces and make sure that I get a victory. So this is going to be a very important part of the battle. He's able to get there a split second before my spear units can, and he's going to start landing blows on both of my skirmishers. So that's going to be a big turn of events and a big blow to my strategy. He was able to isolate one of my units and pick them apart. Now, of course, my spears and my sturdy units did not necessarily fall apart, but he was able to get rid of my skirmishers. So right now, where we stand is he has cavalry units, and I have essentially not an infantry edge. I have more units and I have more spear units, so I am able to fix him with my units, and because I have more than him, I can kind of do a sword and shield strategy where some of my units will hold place and I can flank around the rest of his units. Something my opponent has done right here is isolate 2 of his units, so again, make sure to take advantage of that. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to move my skirmishers to the back, make sure they're supported by spears, put these guys in hoplite formation, and try and get rid of the rest of his cavalry and take on these 2 guys here. I really want to make sure I can isolate these units and get rid of them, and at the same time keep remembering that you are playing that game where you're just trying to dance away from his units. And at this point I'm looking around the battlefield looking for more units, and I didn't quite see that I had my cavalry units yet, but I will before the end of the battle. So you can see right here his units on the right are outnumbered. He has 2 of them against my 3, so I'm going to quickly put these guys into attack mode. I have 2 of my swordsmen. Thorax swordsmen are not that great, so I'm going to go ahead and reinforce with the rest of my troops and basically hold his forces at bay. His cavalry are engaged with my spears. That's exactly what I want to have happen. The rest of his troops, we're going to go to high ground, but seeing the danger here of me basically knocking out his units there, he's going to have to fall back. And I did find my cavalry. I'm making sure they're staying hidden behind the hill, and I'm going to try and use them to the best effect. Now, one of the problems here is with his heavy infantry, they're actually very strong. They're going to take a while to break, so I'm not going to be able to destroy them before his units get here to reinforce. So I'm definitely going to have to do something. And another problem is I'm up against the red lines, so I can't retreat any further, which is exactly what he wanted to do. Now, if I had a huge skirmisher army and I was still depending on my skirmishers, this would be a really bad position for me. But because we've come to the sort of the end phase of the battle, where I don't have too many skirmishers, it's not as big of a deal. So I've been able to halt his assault by spreading out my forces. If I kept all my units kind of in the center, he could have just straight on charged me, but by spreading out my forces, he can't just charge the center, because then he'll just be exposed on the flank. So that's exactly what I'm doing. If your opponent is bearing down on you like this, just spread out. Spread out. He won't know where to go, but at the same time, make sure you're not isolating any of your units. So, obviously keep your spears together, make sure your skirmishers are not getting too exposed. So here, for example, I'm keeping an eye on these guys. I'm not doing it quick enough. My spears are not going to be able to get there in time, so my opponent's going to charge with his cavalry. At the same time over here, he's going to land a sandwich, so I'm in position to land a rear strike on these guys. And this is where it starts to get a bit messy. His units are starting to get engaged, and at this point, the strategy in the micro is basically over. We're at the end phase of the battle. This is just going to be the grinding fest, so I have to make sure that all my units that are engaged in the utmost best position possible, because once they're there, they're basically going to be locked in. So at this point, you really have to think about where do you want to place your units, what angles are you going to get engaged from, who's going to be supporting whom, and who has the abilities on cooldown, whatever. So my goal here is to hold up the right side with those two units, put them on phalanx position, hoplite position, whatever. I'm going to try and hold them up here. He doesn't want to charge directly at my spear, so I'm able to hold him back. And at the same time, I have my horses here who I'm going to want to engage with the back of his troops. I see that his horses here are engaging with mine, so I'm going to make sure to pull away. Earlier on in Rome 2's history, that would have resulted in some major losses, but due to tweaks, I'm able to pull out. And what this allows me to do is move them to the back of his forces. And if he decides to engage on the right, I'm going to have some horses that can hopefully land a rear attack. Seeing the threat from the back, my opponent's going to disengage. So even by putting a threat in the back of your enemy, you're able to force him back. You can see there we didn't really have a battle at all. We lined up and then we just broke apart, just because I put a threat in the back of his units. And even here, he's trying to bait my units forward, and he disengages at the last moment, and that's because I still have units in his back and he's not quite sure what he wants to do. So at this point, he's going to try and isolate my cavalry here. What I'm going to try and do is go straight for his general, tie them down, and move in more of my spears to hopefully take out his general. I know if I can do that, that'll give me the edge. I myself have lost my own units, so the general's dead, and I'm definitely going to have to even the fight. So at this point, we're going to try and sandwich him real quick. And if I can knock out his general, hopefully the progressive morale penalty that he'll get will knock out most of his troops. I know they're tired, I know they've been running, and at this point, if I can land that assault on his general and kill his general, then I would say we're pretty much even in this fight. I think at this point he's been cornered. We're towards the box of the red line, and right here you can see I routed his cavalry, so it's going to be down to the infantry right here. Actually, his cavalry is still alive, but I would say they're probably not in the best of conditions, and they're up against an entirely spear army, so they're going to be minimally effective. As long as I can just kill his general, then I'd be happy. Right here, I think the fight is basically even, but I would give the advantage to my opponent because he does have the swordsmen. Swordsmen, if they can get around the flanks, around the sides of my infantry, they'll be able to land some pretty good blows and I think take me out. So my general is engaged with some of his swordsmen, and I'm a bit worried because they're starting to lose more and more men. If my general unit right here goes down, then that's going to be the end of my army. So at this point, the battle timer actually runs out, so I was kind of sad about that, but I was happy that we had at least a good battle, and my opponent did well, and I think I held my own for Athens against the barbarian forces. So yeah, I hope you guys can learn from that. I will see you next time. Let me know if you have any more questions about multiplayer, or if there's any factions you want me to try. See you guys next time.